The member for Central Kimberley-Pilbara.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I join with other members in congratulating you upon your election to the chair and to congratulate the Cabinet Ministers for their election to the Cabinet postings. And I also take the opportunity of congratulating the Leader of the Opposition and his Deputy, the newly elected members of Parliament, whose speeches, their inaugural speeches that I've just had the opportunity of listening to and enjoying. I congratulate you upon your election to the Parliament. And to all of the members re-elected to the place, it is good to be in your company. It is a great privilege to serve the people of Western Australia in this Parliament. It comes with all of the challenges, all of the heartaches, and all of the pleasures that are associated with parliamentary life. In my own particular case, I want to pay a particular tribute to and thanks to the voters, the electors of Central Kimberley-Pilbara. It's a part of the state that I've grown to know and love well, and it's a part of the state that I believe holds some of the greatest attractions and some of the greatest strengths of what makes up Western Australia. As well, I've been lucky enough to have been supported in my quest for election to this Parliament, not only by those electors, but by a team and a network of people from one end of that electorate to the other, from the northeasternmost end of the electorate up at the Warman community at Turkey Creek, all the way down through communities and towns like Halls Creek, Fitzroy Crossing, out into the remote communities of Kirakara and Balgo, Nookanbar and Yearley, places as far down into the Pilbara as Pannawonica, Tom Price and Paraburdoo, and of course the main centre of Port Hedland. And in each of those communities there have been people of great dedication that have fought hard for the election of a Labor member and the return of Labor to office in this state. To them I express my deep appreciation. I know that they are looking forward to a government and a member that will deliver to meet their needs. I've also been particularly blessed with the strong support of a close family, and in my own particular case, a young team of 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, who have been dedicated in their support for me. With my wife Anne, they have provided extraordinary support in the face of the challenges of politics. One of the family network in particular, my young son Ben, has been amazing in his dedication to have our family, and me in particular, be available to serve the community of Western Australia. And I do say thanks to them for the long route upon which we've been on, the long trek we've been on. I forget the company into which I've come. the long trek on which we've been on. My election to this House has been after 22 years in a gentleman's chamber. and you'd say absolutely dead right, a gentleman's chamber it's been. And I was first elected there 22 years ago or more, which was to the seat then of North Province, the old seat that took in all of the Pilbara and the Kimberley regions in July 82 at a by-election. Subsequently, I then was elected in 89 to serve the vast mining and pastoral region. And it was while a member for that region that I had the opportunity of being elected to as Leader of the Opposition in the other place, as being then the opportunity of serving the people of Western Australia as a Cabinet Minister in this state. And I consider that to have been an enormous privilege and a great opportunity to put your hands upon the levers that can deliver to people in need from one end of regional Western Australia to the other. It was while in that role that I was faced with that sudden death of a friend, the death of your good friend, Mr. Speaker, and a friend to many people in this place, Kevin Richards, whose candidacy for the federal seat of Kalgoorlie was only days away from the close of nomination. And an extraordinary sadness for his extended network and all of his friends and the vast electorate of Kalgoorlie to find that they'd been stripped and robbed of an opportunity to deliver into the National Parliament someone of that character and colour. And then, in the face of that tragedy, all hell broke loose around the Labor Party, around the federal seat of Kalgoorlie, to find someone able, ready, willing and able to contest that seat. Well, they didn't find someone exactly willing, but the pressure came on, and the pressure came from all quarters, from one end of that seat to the other, from every section of the Labor Party, from good friends all around me, and who were encouraging me to do what needed to be done, make available a candidate for the federal seat of Kalgoorlie, knowing that there were a couple of options available to me: election to the National Parliament, or if that was not to happen, come back here. I then had the strong counsel and advice of my young son Ben, who said to me, he's a student of politics and economics at the University of Western Australia, only in his second year, more wisdom than his dad. And he said, I hope you appreciate that in a strong economy like this one, and with the circumstances going exactly as they are, this is an impossible task. And I said, well, look, it probably is. And there is just a slim chance, but let's give it everything. We were up against a Howard government who, in my view, at the national level, had lost, I believe, the right to govern. They'd lost their respect for the issues of integrity and honesty in government, and they deserved, in my view, effort and energy on the part of as many Australians to rise up and to see if there would be the opportunity of showing them the door from the National Treasury benches. I knew that that would be a superhuman task, but I'm also conscious that in my life, everything that I've ever done by throwing energy, enthusiasm, hard work at it, has conquered all. In this particular case, it was not enough, and that extra special bit of magic that was required for that seat wasn't there. That is the magic that comes from a national trend. And so I wasn't able to deliver upon the dream of Kevin Richards and his supporters, the people of federal Kalgoorlie that were wanting to see a Labor government elected from that particular seat. Nonetheless, that then created an opportunity for me to then come back and focus where I was heading, back to the state parliament, to focus in on the challenges of delivering good government, responsive government to the people of regional Western Australia in particular, but to all Western Australians. And I believe that that's been done well in the first 4 years of the Gallup team, and I'm confident that it can be done over the successive terms of this team in office. And it is, I've come to realise, why I am absolutely to my bootstraps Labor. It is something that has happened because of the experience that has shaped me. I've come into politics in Western Australia, originally contesting or originally supporting the contest for the state seat of Kimberley back in 1977, when I worked with Ernie Bridge to try and see him elected to the state parliament. It took 3 goes before we were successful. Court of Disputed Returns in the middle of one, and then effectively securing his election in 1980. It was hard work. You're up against politics, legislation at the time that made it difficult, and the social conditions at the time that made it challenging for an Aboriginal person to take their place, to represent a seat like that in a place like this here in Western Australia. An extraordinary advance that was made in his election, and of course been followed up by successive now a successor here in this place in my colleague, the member for Kimberley, Carol Martin, who brings all of the strengths that come from the Aboriginal community into this parliament, as well as the many other strengths that the member for Kimberley has here and puts on display in this place, as she does in her electorate. The contest for the seat of Central Kimberley Pilbara, from which I've just come, It was, for me, a much more difficult task than I ever imagined would be the case. It was, firstly, longer than was expecting, this campaign as unencumbered, either as being a minister or as a member for the area. It's a vast seat. It's a huge seat that is very difficult to contest, and made difficult as well because there were particular pressures, if you like to see them as almost bitternesses, that were on display during that contest, and a lot of very personalised campaigning that was on in that area over an extended period of time. I chose to rise away from the personality politics that was on in the north of the state at that time, and to really try to contest the seat on just simply focusing in on the issues, focusing in on delivering upon an agenda to meet the needs of the people of that area. It was, I've discovered, for anyone that takes politics seriously, for anyone that takes it seriously to the point where you work hard at it, totally exhausting. I gave it absolutely everything, and I know that around this place there will be so many others that have had that same experience of how much you give up of your family life, your social life, your business life, your financial resources to make yourself available to serve the community. And for me, that was part of that exercise through which we have just come. Nonetheless, I suppose those of us that can sit in this chamber know that there is a sense of winners are grinners, and that you've got the opportunity now as sitting back either as members of the Parliament on either side of the House, knowing that your campaigns have been successful. But now come the task, the more difficult task of delivering and meeting the needs of the people that have elected us to this place, that have entrusted to us the formation of government. I've found that by mustering energy and enthusiasm, I've been blessed with prodigious amounts of energy and lots of enthusiasm for the work that I've discharged. I've been able to use those energies to deliver upon and to meet the needs of people across regional Western Australia especially. For me, it's been part of my life to have been intimately caught up in regional Western Australia since 1977. And in regional Western Australia, I was able to build links with the Aboriginal community especially that have been really a driving force in my life, a driving force for me in politics. The links, the relationships, the friendships with the Aboriginal community have motivated my efforts to strive for a better state, a better nation in which the interests and the rights of the Aboriginal people of this country are supported, protected, looked after and worked with to enhance the whole body corporate, if you like, of the Australian community, the whole body politic, to make us all better for being embracive, inclusive of the Aboriginal communities. And for me, that's been a journey that's taken me through the remote and regional communities of Western Australia, the Aboriginal communities, and through that struggle, learnt more about the struggles of other regional Western Australians and the needs of other regional Western Australians. And it was what turned me in the direction of fighting for the services to regional Western Australia throughout my political life. One of the great yardsticks for me in politics and in my working life has been to judge myself on how you relate to those that are less fortunate than yourself. I think it's a yardstick that we all need to have in the Australian community, in whatever role we serve. How do we respond to the challenges of the less fortunate? How do we meet and respond to their needs? And for me, that becomes the critical character test for myself, and it's the way I find myself looking to others, asking of others to be responsive to the needs of the less fortunate. They, in my view, have the first call on each of us. It's the requirement of the human condition to respond to the needs of the less fortunate. And then as well to support those with opportunity and promise and talent. And through that, by that support, to make sure that you've got then a community that can provide the support more widely. It is these criteria that makes for a just and humane society. It is, for me, the essential task of being human. Today, this part of the globe is conscious that we've got, again, neighbours struck with another earthquake, another tragedy. And through that previous tragedy of the Boxing Day tsunami, we discovered not only a lot about the region of which we're part, more about the region of which we're part, well, I think we also discovered a lot about the Australian community. It's basically decent. It's basically very generous in instinct. It's extraordinarily open to generosity of spirit. And that was on display to our near neighbours. What's required of the Australian community, what the Australian community needs in order to keep it open with its hand of friendship and support for those in need, is just good leadership. And that good leadership often has to come from the Parliament, from governments, and from other people in the community that can keep guiding and shaping the generosity of spirit, which is really intrinsic to the Australian condition. I think makes us quite special in the community of nations. For me as well, an important part of the role of being a parliamentarian, of being a servant to the community, of being a government in this community, is to build communities, is to really focus in on building a strong sense of careful community that looks after one another and builds a sense of obligation to each other. This is requiring real focus, real hard work. It's what should be as well rewarding work when it's done at its best. It is about, in part, it's about infrastructure, but it's also about issues of building the people within our communities, working with families, making sure that they can thrive, neighbourhoods that can flourish, towns and regions that can prosper, and states that benefit as a result. Community is where there's a real sense of soul. It's soul, not just, I suppose, in that sort of classic psychological sense or religious sense. Maybe it's got more in common with the soul when they're talking about music. But whatever sense you use, it is where a community has real soul about it, where it's got that nurtured respect for one another, a respect that makes it a healthy place in which to live. There are places around the world and around our own state and our nation where that sense of soul's been lost, and where there are people that are really struggling. At present, there are too many places where the battle is lost, and there are some basic features of necessary community building that need to take place. Oftentimes, the infrastructure that's part of these communities are the symbols for those communities, and regrettably, some of those symbols are now quite decrepit. Aged public infrastructure that's lost its shine, it's lost its usefulness to the communities, and does require enormous effort on the part of government to put back fresh infrastructure, new buildings that can deliver upon the health and educational needs of communities, can provide centres for sport and recreation. They're the symbols of what can be done when communities are humming and thriving at their best. In my own electorate of Central Kimberley Pilbara, this term we're going to have the opportunity to see much needed capital infrastructure put into that particular electorate as a result of the pre-election commitments that were made in the run-up to this most recent state election. And in my own major centre now of Headland, where we'll see a hospital and aged care facility, some $79 million worth of expenditure to be rolled out there, alongside, in that same town, a new Headland Senior High School with an upgrade of a facility there of some $6 million, with a South Headland Police Station of some $8.4 million, with a huge effort on government employee accommodation in Headland and throughout the Pilbara region. We have in that community, through those symbols of community infrastructure, much work to be done. The towns that find it difficult to attract in people, when you let things fall into disrepair, it is no wonder that it's so difficult to attract people to be there. I've been looking very closely in recent times at the housing accommodation provided to the doctors, and it has become over the years, quite frankly, a disgrace, and it is no wonder that it's so difficult to attract in medical professionals to work in those communities. It should come as no surprise that these days it's becoming almost mandatory to learn Mandarin to get access to medicine in regional parts of Australia, because you're needing to bring in foreign doctors to live in circumstances that others will not go to. And Australian doctors increasingly heading off to Canada and places where the communities value them better and the facilities are provided for them. This is a challenge, and I'm pleased that my own government has recognised the challenge and is putting in funds for government employee accommodation and medical employee accommodation to make it possible for doctors to be attracted and retained within those communities. More will have to be done. And in places like Tom Price and Paraburdoo, communities which many people will remember from visits that they will have done in previous years, attractive little places they were, towns that were considered great jewels in the Pilbara. Over the years, time's marched on and the places are no longer as shiny and bright as they were when they were first commenced, and there is much of an upgrade that is required in those places to make them attractive places to live as well as to work. There is a huge pressure that comes upon this state as people opt out of residential lifestyles in these communities because essentially they're no longer the attractive places to be that they once were. The infrastructure has gone that was attractive. The houses are now looking shabby and tired. The companies have not done their work to maintain those houses in the manner that is required of a contemporary worker. And governments have not done all that's necessary to ensure that the schools are upgraded and maintained to a level that continues to attract families to live. Fortunately, the backlog is now to be tackled, and the money is on the table over these 4 years to tackle the issues of the school maintenance backlog and to continue the upgrade of those basic community facilities that will, in the end, attract people back to live in these communities and to work in those communities long into the future. A part of that program of making these places attractive to live as well as to work is to ensure they've got the good connections by road to other centres, and the vital Tom Price to Karratha Road will see the next stage 2 being put in through this term in government and hopefully lead in double quick time to then the final stages of that construction of a bitumen link from Tom Price all the way across to Karratha, opening up not only opportunity for the inland residents but the coastal people as well, and of course, just as importantly, opening up fresh economic opportunities through growth in tourism and access to the resource sector. In other parts of this electorate, places like Fitzroy Crossing, $11 million allocated to the construction of a new hospital, $12 million for work to commence on the new high school, work in Halls Creek to complete and open the new hospital complex, and to see now the allocation as a result of our pre-election commitments of $2.9 million to complete the new Halls Creek Aquatic Centre, much sought after within that community. Other places and towns and centres within my electorate, places like Marble Bar and Nullagine, Panawanika and Telfer. So many of these communities that are requiring focus and attention from government and from the corporate sector to respond to their needs. My electorate has such a vast numbers of these very remote Aboriginal communities. Places like Warman and Balgo, Yandiara, Kirakara, Nukumbar, Wonkajunka, Mullaja, Nullangudgee, Jugareri, Yakanara, Nullabida, Mullen, Kundajara, Yili, Mundibungu, Kunawaragi, Punmu, Pungo, Australi, Warralong, Wakathuni and Baleri. They're just some of the many places of remote regional parts of central Kimberley Pilbara, communities that I've got to know extremely well. They've got to know me very well over the years, and they have so many needs. Frankly, life for many Aboriginal people has never been worse. Never been worse. Some individuals, some families, and a small number of communities have started to do well and are doing very well. But the overwhelming majority of the Aboriginal communities, especially those in the remote parts of Western Australia, have huge challenges of health and education, the needs to really see dramatic improvements in numeracy and literacy, access to paths to employment and training. These are huge tasks that we as a community have an enormous responsibility to rise to this challenge. We've got as well the rampant diabetes that is now afflicting so many of the Aboriginal community that have got some quality work being done, but not enough. My former colleague, Ernie Bridge, doing some fantastic work in this area of diabetes, attacking and challenging the threat that diabetes represents to the Aboriginal community. Quality work that's being done from one end of this state to the other, and now, interestingly, supported even in Canberra by the national government to tackle the many needs of the Aboriginal community that are living in places like Narrabundah, just in that small, lower socioeconomic part of Canberra that I happen to know reasonably well from my days there as a student at the Australian National University, where it now seems to have a very large number of Aboriginal people. And Ernie has risen to that challenge as well. There is, within the demographic of the Aboriginal community, an extraordinary statistic of this, where over half the population is under the age of 19. This is a tidal wave of youngsters that are coming through the demographic of Western Australia, and in the northern parts of the state especially. Youngsters that have all of the health that comes with birth, and then the challenges and the dreams that will not be met unless the community of Western Australia and the government of Western Australia can find ways of responding to the opportunities that should be theirs. The difficulties facing the Aboriginal community are very self-evident in a major population centre like South Hedland, where there is enormous levels of dysfunction on display that comes through any exposure that becomes quite intimate during the election periods, where you're in and out of the houses of so many people. South Hedland is, I'm afraid to have to say, a huge blight for us as a state. I was familiar with this community very closely just 20 years ago when I started off in this job. Now coming back, 22 years ago, coming back more intensely and finding a community in collapse in the face of vast resource wealth that's being generated from that part of the Pilbara. Huge amounts of prosperity on display going through the port, huge expansion in the oil and gas industry, vast quantities of investment, and vast quantities of return to the West Australian communities and to the corporate players. We have an enormous obligation to find ways of investing as well in the people that are part of these regions that make up this great state of Western Australia. And I'm pleased that my colleagues, the Planning Infrastructure Minister and the Housing and Works Minister, have been, in the lead up to the state election, the Planning Infrastructure Minister was able to come up with the support of the government to announce that there would be a major initiative in South Hedland to respond to the planning and housing and urban challenges that are there, and that is going to require enormously dedicated and amount of hard work and effort to turn that around, to design the place back for safety and to focus on programs of intervention within the community of South Hedland, and to work on the public facilities that are theirs that do need so much work to be done. There are programs that can respond to those needs, programs that the government's put in place, issues like the funds like the Pilbara Fund, the Regional Investment Fund, great initiatives and a great work that needs to be done as a result of those programs. China and other market opportunities that we have as a state are producing enormous benefits for all of us. But there are risks that I've discovered over this life in Parliament that come with resource development. For me, I started off in an electorate that had thriving towns of Shea Gap and Goldsworthy and hugely successful communities at Cockatoo and Coolin. These were communities that I knew very well. In the case of Shea Gap and Goldsworthy, it now is just simply part of the landscape without a single feature left to show where the towns once were. And of course, Cockatoo and Coolin in a different shape altogether from the way it was just a few short years ago. These are lessons for me when you see towns and communities disappear off the landscape. And it does become a challenge in regional Western Australia to make sure that with the pressure of resource development, you don't forget the need to build a strong regional Western Australia at the same time, because there are enormous benefits that flow from a focus in on regional development. tackling the needs of the people that live within and are part of those regions, the Aboriginal people, for starters, the others that are there. So many of them looking for work opportunities, employment opportunities in the resource sector. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I get the chance, do I, to ask for a small extension? I don't. In which case then, I'll finish my words by saying that I look forward to working on these many challenges long into the future for the benefit of all regional Western Australians and especially this great state that is ours.